Hi, everyone. Welcome to the March 31st edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. The focus of the show this week is Florida Derby Day from last Saturday at Gulfstream Park. We'll be recapping all of the stakes racing that took place that day, including the main event, the Florida Derby. We'll really stick at Gulfstream the entire week because it's one of the only major tracks that was running consistently last week. We'll talk about one race from earlier in the week at Gulfstream, but it mostly is the Saturday card that we will be discussing. Craig, March 31st, it's kind of weird that March is coming to a close because looking back at this month, I mean, it's just been a whirlwind of developments, especially in the racing world. It feels like an eternity ago that we got that big news in the second week of March about those federal indictments. And now really it's just 3 weeks later and there's very few stakes racing happening anywhere around the country.
Yeah, there is. It was pretty much Gulfstream or bust. I think there was one Arkansas bred race at Oakland last weekend, and that was a really small stake at Fonner. But nothing we're going to talk about here. We're going to focus on Gulfstream, and I guess from here on out, we just got to play it by ear and see who's going to run. Latest news I saw is there was optimism Santa Anita would open back up, and they might even have their big races this week. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think we all have our fingers crossed. I mean, what I will say about this Florida Derby Day was that it was definitely welcome to have this card, and it was a fantastic card. I mean, I tweeted about how long it was to print out the PPs for this day. Got some flack about actually printing out PPs in this day and age. But no, I mean, the races were stacked all day. The stakes racing was competitive, and it felt almost like a Breeders' Cup day, not because they were all Grade 1 races, but just because everybody's eyes were just so trained on Gulfstream since it was really the only action that was happening there. And it just was pretty cool to have everybody sort of participating and giving feedback on the developments of the day. Let's start off by talking about the Florida Derby, the main event, and we'll just work our way backwards through the stakes racing. Tis the Law got the job done, now 4 for 5 in his career. Really, aside from that one questionable ride and trip that he got in the Kentucky Jockey Club, he's been pretty much perfect in his career, and I think he exits this first portion of the season as the definitive leader on the East Coast.
Oh, he does. I don't think there's much doubt about that. And some could even argue he's the leader overall. I know we have the strong Baffert contingent out west, but he's been just as good as any of them. He's been totally professional. He ran a new top in here for on my speed figure scale of 121, which is just really good figure, as good as we've seen in any of the Derby points races. And it's just hard to see him not being a factor in any 3-year-old race he would enter now. I'm not sure what the plans are now. I know the Arkansas Derby has been pushed back to May 2nd. Maybe others will use that as a spot to go, and he would show up there in what would be almost like a Kentucky Derby this year. But it's just really hard to say. But huge effort from him. And I thought some of the others ran good in here as well. Obviously, Chivalry at not crazy that he shouldn't have been 80-1, but crazy that he was able to run second at 80-1. Just ran a huge race. I thought Ete Indian ran a good race from that outside post. I saw some pictures where he had some pretty nasty cuts on his leg. It's always hard to say how much that really affects a horse during a running of a race, but you can safely say it didn't help, that's for sure. And then we had Gouverneur Morris, who was only able to run fourth, but improved a little, ran a new top for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, as for the speed figure of the race, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but just looking at them, it looks like you had to break out the 1 1/8 2-turn races from the other 1-turn dirt races on the card. And I can't really argue with that. Comparing this race to the Howell's Hope, the times were pretty similar. The pace of this Florida Derby was obviously slower than the Howell's Hope. And I think you could see that based on just the visual impact as they were heading around the first turn. The field was pretty bunched. And this was a race that pretty much held together on the front end as Chivalry and Ete Indian. They were able to maintain their positions and held on for second and third, whereas nobody really did any running from the back of the pack. Tis the Law was the only horse that passed more than a couple of runners. Gouverneur Morris made a mild late run to be fourth, but he was never really a factor in this race. I don't have a whole lot to add about Tis the Law. I did see Barkley Tagg in his post-race quotes in the Daily Racing Form was saying that his main goal really is that first Saturday in September, the Kentucky Derby. So it sounds like he's more likely to give the horse a layoff now. And he was talking about using, assuming that they do run them, a New York series of prep races like maybe the Dwyer and the Travers to get into the Kentucky Derby. He was talking about maybe having 2 or 3 starts between now and then. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how many of these trainers manage their horses to really keep them in form and get them to peak a little bit later in the year than they were originally intending.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to follow, especially with, I mean, it's got to be impossible to plan a schedule right now. You just kind of got to play it by ear. The one thing I'd say about the flow in the race is pretty much after the top 4, the other horses there wasn't a whole lot of depth in this field. We talked about it on the forecast. I think we'd have been surprised we'd have been shocked if Chivalry won, but of the others, if the first, third, or fourth finisher didn't win, we would have been totally shocked by that. So I'm not going to put a lot of stock in the race flow here because I just didn't think a whole lot of the others.
Yeah, and I did post the rhetorical question on Twitter that a lot of people had different responses to. Where did Independence Hall's Nashua performance come from? Because obviously he did not run well in this race. I had taken an optimistic view coming in, kind of with some reservations, though. I know we talked about it on the forecast last week. He's not a horse you really could be sure of what you were going to get from him. And unfortunately, he took a step in the wrong direction. Just one of these horses that ran an exceptionally fast speed figure as a 2-year-old. And it's kind of a mystery as to why he hasn't been able to carry it forward into his 3-year-old season.
Yeah, I totally forgot he was in here. He ran so poorly. He wouldn't have shocked me if he won based on that race we saw earlier in his career. But as you know, I wasn't really high on him here. But yeah, that's just how poorly he ran that didn't even think to discuss him as one of the also rans. But he certainly didn't run well at all. As for the speed figure you mentioned, I did treat the 2 9-furlong races differently than the 8.5 furlong race. It's one of those, usually I would rate them together given the close proximity, but I have questions about the times of that 1.16 race, especially the final time. It's really hard to time from video given the angles they use with that alternate finish line and where the race starts. But I had enough questions that I wasn't going to treat it the same. It would have lowered this race. It would have lowered the house hope, and it would have gave the Oaks a figure I just wasn't comfortable giving, particularly with the really slow pace that we'll talk about when we get to that one.
Yeah, let's actually hop right into the Gulfstream Park Oaks and stick with the dirt races for now and just wrap up these 3-year-olds. Swiss Skydiver won this race on the front end, which maybe you could have made a case for her winning the race. I don't think anybody foresaw her going to the lead and leading this field from gate to wire. She is a horse who had raced as a closer in all of her races up until this point, but Paco Lopez was on her this day. He was aggressive in a race where a lot of other riders just chose to not ride for position coming out of the gate, and that can be really detrimental in these 1.16 races at Gulfstream where you head right into the first turn, and Swiss Skydiver just never looked back.
Yeah, this was a race that was just really puzzling when you look at the rides that you got. There was a lot of this on Saturday, given the big fields, a lot of rides that had you shaking your head, but basically half the field in this one, I think, it's just mind-boggling that nobody wanted to show any speed. This race was kind of the inspiration. I posted on Twitter how often speed wins at all the different distances and surfaces, and it just really is crazy how these guys yank horses back off the pace. And I think the main one we have to talk about is Lake Avenue with Joel Rosario. I just have no idea what he was doing. Here in the States, we don't know what kind of directions were given from the trainer, but it's kind of hard to imagine Bill Mott would say to yank this horse back off the pace. I think you could argue she was probably the best horse in the race given the pace that she got, but in the end, it's just a race that I'm putting a line through because the pace was really slow. They weren't able to finish all that strongly, so just not a good race at all for me and a bit of an eyesore, really.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say about Swiss Skydiver is that if you've watched a lot of her prior races, even though she's been ridden as a closer and has run from behind, she's a horse who's always really keen in her races. And even when they get her to settle in behind horses, she just races like she wants to do more. She fights the rider a little bit. And Paco Lopez, to his credit, this filly broke well, and he didn't grab her. I mean, he didn't try to say, well, okay, this is a filly that's ridden from the back in the past, so I'm kind of married to doing that again. He just played the break, and you wish that more riders would do that. Obviously, Joel Rosario on Lake Avenue didn't have the same plan. I'm a big fan of Joel Rosario. I think that he is a rider who takes a lot of chances. It works out for him a lot more than it does for a lot of other riders who take similar chances. But he does at times overthink things a little bit too much, I would say. And this is a situation where I think that happened. There was plenty of speed on paper, but you still have to play the brake in these races. And Lake Avenue, she did brake maybe a half step slowly. I think Swiss Skydiver had maybe a half length of position on her coming past the wire for the first time. But still, he made no attempt to move up forward. He actually grabbed her and took her back to get her, I think, all the way back to 5th place early. It's just not the kind of ride you're supposed to be giving a horse, especially in one of these 2-turn mile and the 16th races at Gulfstream, where getting forward position is almost always an advantage.
Yeah, it sure is. And I do want to get your opinion. As I said, I'm drawing a line through this race, but I was really perplexed by the just terrible performances by Spice is Nice and Tonalist Shape. Do you think that was pace, or do you think there was more to that? Because they just never look like contenders at any point.
Yeah, I mean, the track at Gulfstream on Saturday, the main track, I wouldn't say that it was biased in the sense that it was favoring the rail or the outside, or that any particular running style had a huge advantage. But I will say we didn't see a ton of running from the back of the pack, and horses that were making big runs did seem to flatten out a little bit. I would say while we did see a pace collapse in the Hal's Hope, that was kind of the outlier of the dirt races that we saw on Saturday. And Spice is Nice, in particular, was just completely out of position for the entire race. I mean, she's never the quickest horse out of the gate in the first place, but she was just losing position into the first turn, and she was, I think, second to last moving down the backstretch. She was just never going to win from that position, especially considering the pace of this race. And Tonalist Shape, she did really regress here. She was wide the entire way. Ground loss alone doesn't account for how poorly she ran. But I think it is worth noting that those 3 horses that were coming out of the Devona Dale, Spice is Nice, Tonalist Shape, and even Dream Marie, they finished right together again, but they finished 5th, 6th, and 7th. So it does make you question the quality of that Devona Dale a little bit.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is looking at our pace figures, which are all coded in blue, of course, for this race. Swiss Skydiver had, after 6 furlongs in the race, had just a 90 pace figure, and she finished with a 106 final time figure. So it was basically impossible for anybody to make up ground through the latter part of this race.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on it too much, but this is the kind of race where I don't think it's a stretch to say that Lake Avenue probably should have won this race if she had gotten the aggressive ride that she really deserved, because she's a horse who we know is effective on the lead. And I think she did run a really nice race to almost get up for second, all things considered, since nobody was doing any passing late. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. Let's move on to the turf stakes at Gulfstream Park, and we'll start with the longest of them, the 1.5-mile Pan American, which went as race 12 on Saturday. And the theme of these turf races is trainers sending out horses that finished 1-2 and complete the entire exacta, and that was the case here, although it was the other Mike Maker horse who got the job done, Bema's Boy. Really a tale of 2 different trips here, as Bema's Boy saved all the ground and Zulu Alpha just took the overland route.
Yeah, there were definitely some interesting trips in this race as well. And as you said, Bema's Boy, not to take anything away from him, he took full advantage, and he's in just top form right now. He had come out of that race at Houston, and he's a horse I remember back at Saratoga. I was actually there last year when he won. I think it was an optional claimer by just a whole bunch of lengths. I think he won by 6 lengths, which is just a huge amount on turf. But he really seems to have found new life since he stretched out to 1.5 miles, which isn't a big surprise for Mike Maker. I think it is a surprise that he beat his stablemate, Zulu Alpha, who had come in red hot. But that horse, this was kind of a last-second audible for the horse to be in this race, given the state of racing these days. And as you said, it probably was a trip that I think if Tyler Gaffalione had to do over again, he might think it. I saw Andy Serling tweeted on Twitter, and I would basically agree with the word he used, and that was panicked.
Yeah, I mean, for when I first watched the race, I was inclined to be critical of Tyler Gaffalione for making that early move. When I went back and watched it again, I think I wouldn't be so hard on him, because it was a race that was just had no speed, especially after Channel Cat didn't break well. I mean, the only horse that could have gone to the lead was him, it seemed, who had run well in the lead before. So you had a horse like Spooky Channel up front early, who's not really a front-running type. And it just seemed like the kind of race where you wouldn't want to get caught in behind horses like Channel Cat ultimately ended up getting in the stretch. He was never really in the clear. So I don't blame Tyler Gaffalione for riding Zulu Alpha like he was the best horse and making an early backstretch move like that. While it is unorthodox, I tend to like riders being a little more aggressive in those situations than just waiting, and getting a little too cute on an odds-on favorite and making that horse have to be so much the best in the stretch to win the race. Because Zulu Alpha really was in position to win at the end, and he barely got by Current at the end of the race. Current, not a horse who had excelled going this far in the past, not a horse who had run this kind of speed figure before. So I do think Zulu Alpha regressed a little bit. I mean, he's a horse who had been in decent form last year, but he wasn't really a standout in this division. And the real question so far in 2020 was, is he just a horse who improved so much that now he's at the top of the division, or is he a horse that just got very fortunate trips in his last two races? Personally, that question wasn't settled for me, and I think the same for you. That's why we like Channel Cat a little bit in this race. And it just showed that when everything doesn't go perfectly for Zulu Alpha, maybe he still is the same old Zulu Alpha.
Yeah, and you mentioned Channel Cat. If you're a trip handicapper, you could write a novel on what he went through. Some of it was his own doing at the break, and just kind of put himself in a bad spot where he had to weave through traffic. And with the pace not being all that hot, he wasn't able to get through. Current was an interesting horse for me. He was one of those 3-year-olds last year from a crop that didn't run all that well, but they seem to be stepping up this year, as you'd expect, as they get older. And he was a big price in here, but I thought he ran very well given the circumstances and could be one to watch going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and Bema's boy, you mentioned running at Saratoga last summer. I think I actually picked him. I think it was opening day at Saratoga when he finished third in like a $40,000 claiming race. It was his first start off the claim for Maker. And Mike Maker claimed this horse off just a bunch of dirt races and obviously claimed him with the intention to put him on the turf, probably thinking he'd be a claiming type of horse. But nobody is better than Mike Maker at sort of selecting the horses in his barn that he thinks are going to be best going these turf marathon distances. I mean, there have just been so many horses over the years that he's just progressively over time gotten better, has trained them to relax in these longer races and really finish. It doesn't happen instantaneously. I'm not suggesting anything nefarious like he just is working miracles. It happens over time, and he's able to turn these horses into ones that want to go longer. And I think it's a pattern that more trainers could follow if they focus more on these marathon turf races. But he really has the formula down.
Yeah, I mean, this horse has went 1.5 miles now 3 times, I guess it is, and has 2 wins and a close second. So, as you said, he does this time and time again, and kind of shame on bettors for letting the horse get away at 9-1.
Right after that Pan American, they ran the Grade 3 Appleton, going 1 mile on the turf. And this was a one where the pace really did come apart late. Social Paranoia was able to come from all the way at the back of the pack. Florent Giroux had him in last, even coming to the top of the stretch. He ran by them all, though, with a really eye-catching late run in this race. The pace did help, though, because even though it didn't seem like there was that much speed on paper, some horses got pretty rank going around that clubhouse turn. They really pressured Dr. Edgar on the front end, and it set it up for a late runner.
Yeah, I know we both like Dr. Edgar, and he did make the lead as expected, but unfortunately for me as a bettor, it didn't last long as El Tormenta was ridden up by Julien Leperoux and just really forced the pace, and it got pretty crazy up front. All our fractions for the race are coded in red, and the race just really fell apart late. Social Paranoia, he's another of those 3-year-olds last year who had run some decent races and was certainly a good horse, but hadn't really popped a good figure. And he stepped up and won this one. Now, to be honest, he didn't run a huge speed figure in this one either. He only got a 117. The runner-up, Sambaye, got a better figure for being close to the pace. Him and Frost, I'm forgetting his name now, the horse who I bet, Dr. Edgar.
Dr. Edgar.
Just didn't. Yeah, they actually got as good a figures as the winner because the race just fell apart and they were the survivors. But social inclusion, man, I'm struggling. Social Paranoia will be a horse that he's one to watch, because this was definitely kind of a new running style from him. He'd never come back successfully from that far back. He had shown a tendency to be more up close in his races, so maybe that change of style will fit him.
I think we'd all like a bit more social inclusion rather than social paranoia at this point in time. But he was an appropriate winner on Saturday, given the circumstances that we're in. He's a horse that I had talked about on the forecast last week as potentially liking this turn back in distance, because they had tried to make him go longer. And I think the Belmont Derby last year going 1.25 miles. I think they even ran him 1 5/16 in a stakes race at Kentucky Downs. But he's a horse who had been successful sprinting early in his career, and he was able to use that speed that he has in the late stages of this race to just run by them all on the stretch. So I wonder if he's ultimately going to be a horse that really does turn out to be a mile specialist. And again, this is a race where Todd Pletcher just dominated, had the two horses that filled out the exacta. Sambaye and Social Paranoia turned out to be real compliments to each other, because Sambaye was pressing the pace and was really the horse that did the best of those that were up close early. And Social Paranoia came from so far back. Like you said, not the highest speed figure, but I thought that the winner did run well. And given that it was his first race back off the bench, he's one that I'd be somewhat excited about moving forward. Let's move on to the Hal's Hope, which is one of the dirt races early in the day that was run at the same distance as the Florida Derby, 1.125 miles. As we said when we discussed the Florida Derby, this Hal's Hope featured a different kind of pace scenario than we saw in the last race of the day. They went pretty quickly up front, and Rare Form was just hustled out of that far outside gate to make the lead over Bodie Express. These two ran off on the front end. Bodie Express put that horse away. They really threw it down through that third quarter of a mile, keeping up that hot pace. And Bodie Express just paid the price late. And it was Identifier, who I have no idea how you can come up with this horse, but congrats to those who had him at 60-1.
Yeah, there was no way I was coming up with that horse, I can tell you that. We had it predicted as a race likely to have a fast pace. I don't think there's any doubt that it did. All our fractions and pace figures are coded in red at every single call. And this is just what happens sometime when a race falls apart. The horses who were back off the pace, the top two were just both well back off the pace, kind of fell into the best trips. They didn't get great speed figures, 117 for both of the top two, where Bodie Express, as the only horse who was anywhere remotely near the pace to finish, and I think even the top 7 or 8 here got a 122. So I actually think he was the best horse in the race. He didn't make the lead. He fought to get it, opened up, and just couldn't hold off those long shots. But I think this was actually the best race he's run in a while, despite finishing third to a couple of big long shots.
Yeah, I've got no argument with that. I thought Bodie Express really did run the best race. I'm not even sure that Bodie Express wants to go this far. I think he's maybe a little bit better going shorter distances. But he did run really well to put away that main speed, who really finished nowhere. I think Rare Form finished last in this race, actually. And Bodie Express only lost by 1.5 lengths, almost got the job done. Identifier, again, I have no idea where the performance came from. Just Whistle ran well to be second here. The real story of this race, though, was even though it featured such a fast pace, so many of the more logical closers just couldn't make up any ground from the back of the pack. I know you liked Harvey Wallbanger. I like Sir Anthony. You would have thought these horses would have gotten great pace setups and been threats late, but they just did no running. And it was one of these days at Gulfstream where just seemed like certain horses couldn't muster up rallies in these races. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're looking back. And I've got to wonder from a handicapping perspective how you handle situations like this moving forward, because on paper, these horses ran very poorly, but maybe that was just the way the track was playing on Saturday.
Yeah, it's a really bizarre result. As you said, the race did fall apart, but the logical closers just didn't do any running. Just looking at the chart now, the 3 other horses who were in the top 4 early finished in the last 3 positions, just to highlight how well Bodie Express did run. But other than that, sometimes you just turn the page, because I don't know how else to explain this one.
Let's go back to the turf and talk about some of the fillies and mares in the Grade 3 Orchid, which was race 10 at Gulfstream on Saturday. This was a Grade 3 event going a mile and 3/8. And this was a situation where I think it was a race that just probably in retrospect wasn't worth overcomplicating. The two best horses coming in were pretty clearly Mean Mary and Gentle Ruler, and they were just better than these horses. It was probably a little bit silly that Mean Mary was even money and Gentle Ruler was 5-1. I think a lot of that, as people pointed out, had to do with the fact that Chris Landeros was on that Ophir skid that did finally end this past weekend on Sunday. But these two horses, they're pretty nice fillies at this level.
Yeah, they are. We talked about this one on the forecast. Mean Mary looked like she was going to have a clear lead. She got the clear lead, and once that happened, the race was pretty much over. I thought Gentle Ruler ran fine coming off the layoff. She got a 116 speed figure compared to a 118 for the winner. She's capable of a little better, but like I said, coming off the bench, probably not fully ready to give her best effort, especially chasing a loose on the lead horse. I will say Mean Mary, though she's won the last two without a lot of pressure, she does set an honest pace. It's not like she's going out there and setting 51 fractions or anything like that. She's moving pretty well, so she's earning them. And until she faces a horse who challenges her early, she's going to be really tough to beat at these extended distances.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. My opinion of Mean Mary actually really rose out of this race, whereas I was a little bit skeptical of her coming out of La Prevoyante because that just wasn't a very competitive race, and the pace of that race was just exceptionally slow. This was a more honest pace. I wouldn't say it was a fast pace by any means, but she was going fractions that weren't, I mean, she wasn't walking up front, let's say, and Gentle Ruler really did have every chance in the stretch to make a late run at her, and Mean Mary just turned her away. It's interesting that Graham Motion has stretched her out in distance so early in her career. Typically, you see horses start to tackle these longer marathon races once they get maybe 8, 10, 12 starts under their belts. But he's really targeted Mean Mary towards these longer races basically from the start, and she's done nothing wrong on the turf. She's now 4 for 5 on this surface. Her only poor effort came on the dirt in her first career race. So she's a pretty exciting prospect as a 4-year-old now moving on to the rest of the year in 2020.
She is. It's hard to say where she's going to go as we keep talking about giving the calendar, but she's a fun horse because I like horses to just go to the lead and take it to him and say, catch me if you can. And she's certainly one of those.
We'll stay on the turf in the Cutler Bay, which took place early in the day, one of 2 races for 3-year-olds on the grass on Saturday at Gulfstream. And this one featured a favorite winning. No surprise that Decorated Invader was able to avenge a frustrating loss in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf last year, where I think a lot of people thought that maybe he should have been the winner that day. Just got a nightmare trip, getting shuffled back wide without cover the entire way in a really congested field. Things worked out much better for him in this Cutler Bay because they were really moving on the front end. Joel Rosario just took Decorated Invader to the back of the pack and didn't get cute on him, just took him wide coming off the far turn, but it didn't matter because he had all the momentum to run this field down.
Yeah, he was much, well, I won't say much the best, but he was certainly he got the right setup and took full advantage. He got a 108 TimeformUS speed figure. I initially had this race a bit lower, as you know, this is it was run at the same exact conditions as a race we're going to talk about later, the Sand Springs, and they were very close on time, but using the projection methods that I use based on the other races, it just didn't look reasonable to assign those races very similar speed figures. But the more I went back and dug through, there just really was no reason to break this race out. So that's where the 108 came from. I think originally I had it as low as a 103. But I thought all of the top 4 in here ran well. I thought South Bend has shown he's really is a turf horse. Since moving there, he seems to be getting better and better. And he ran a winning race for the most part if Decorating Invader wasn't in here. And I was particularly impressed with Get Smokin' as well. He's another who survived the pace stool, opened the lead, wasn't able to quite hold off the top 2, but when you look at how all the other pace horses in here finished, he did very well. So again, I thought this was a strong race for 3-year-olds in just March.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think this might be a decent field overall because Decorated Invader, while he hadn't run a particularly high speed figure as a 2-year-old, I mean, as I said, he was impressive at Saratoga and he got that terrible trip in the Breeders' Cup. So he's one that did have the potential to do better. And I agree about Get Smokin'. I think he's the other horse you really want to highlight out of this race because the pace was exceptionally fast. I mean, the horse that was dueling with Get Smokin' and actually outran him to the lead, Inter Miami, I mean, he faded to finish last in this race. I know he was a huge price. I mean, but he was done after about 5 furlongs. And Get Smokin' really continued on gamely, rebroke at the top of the stretch, tried to hold off those closers who had built up so much momentum. He's a horse who's just been steadily improving all winter for Tom Bush, has shown the versatility to handle faster and slower paces. So he's one that I'd be interested in moving forward. But Decorated Invader, I agree. He's the best coming out of this race. And he's one that I'll be interested to see, especially how he does stretching out in distance, because a lot of the major races in this 3-year-old turf division do come going farther these days, a mile and a quarter, a mile and 3/16. So we'll see if added ground is in his wheelhouse. Let's move on to the filly version of this race, the Sanibel Island, which was run a bit later. This one didn't come up quite as fast, but I still think we saw a solid performance from the winner of this race, Highland Glory. One that just didn't get a trip that you would expect to put a horse in a winner's circle. She really was wide the entire way without cover, but she just kept finding in the stretch and was able to just nail the runner-up on the wire.
Yeah, that was some late surge she had. I actually didn't think she was going to get there. And then all of a sudden in that last 20 yards, she put on a burst to just get her nose on the wire. And I was impressed with that. The figure probably doesn't reflect how good the race was, in my opinion. She only got a 99 TimeformUS speed figure. But when you consider how wide she was and how she just made that long sustained run, I was actually pretty impressed with this. And I think she's a better horse than what that 99 would indicate.
Yeah, this is one of those where I think you really do have to take ground loss into account, because not only was she wide just on the far turn, she was wide on the clubhouse turn too. She didn't have cover, and that's a really difficult situation for a young horse to just keep running all the way out in the middle of the racetrack like that and then find more in the stretch. I looked at the Trackist figures. According to that, she covered 55 more feet than Shearmeister, who rode the rail the entire way, setting the pace. And Highland Glory just came and got her in the stretch. She is a full sister to Highland Sky, who was a good horse for these same connections a number of years ago. A horse that never really fulfilled expectations. I think he only ended up his career with maybe a couple of stakes wins to his name after seeming like he might do better than that when he was a 3-year-old. But that pedigree does suggest that Highland Glory is going to be just fine going farther distances, that they get to races like the mile and a quarter Belmont Oaks later in the year, assuming they continue to run this triple series in New York. So she's a filly that, even though she didn't run that fast in this race, is one that I think we might see better from in the future.
Yeah, I just want to make one note about this since we are talking about ground loss. Something in these slower times, me and my assistant, Figuremaker, are going to do is really explore using ground loss in these turf races in addition to pace. I'm not sure where it's going to lead us, but I do think we can improve upon what we have. And we're going to start with turf because I think ground loss is just more important in turf races, and also because it's manageable. There's obviously a lot less turf races run in this country than there are dirt races. So it's something the two of us can probably handle.
That's really interesting and something I'd look forward to. And I totally agree that turf is the place to start with that, because we discuss so many times on this podcast when we're reassessing trips that saving ground is just of the utmost importance, especially on the turns. And racing out in the center of the racetrack like Highland Glory did, you really do want to elevate those performances. And if that could be reflected in the speed figure, I think a lot of people would appreciate that. Let's move back to the dirt and discuss the Sir Shackleton, which featured the return of Vekoma, a horse who had shown a lot of promise early in his 3-year-old season back in 2019. He was the winner of the Bluegrass before not running so well in the Kentucky Derby. This was his first start since then, his first start getting back to a one-turn race since very early in his career. And Vekoma is the kind of horse that, based on this performance, I'm not going to be surprised if he ultimately turns out to be really more of a 7 furlong to a mile kind of runner.
Yeah, this was a really good effort. This is a race David emailed me about because Vekoma only got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure, and that's off a 118 TimeformUS final time figure. And personally, I agree with him. It's a little silly that we're downgrading him in this spot because he's a horse that actually caused the downgrade because he finished so well, where the other horses didn't really get any kind of knock. And this is another thing that's on our to-do list or in these slower times. I'm really looking at these slow pace races and the penalties we give horses, because frankly, sometimes we just go overboard. And this is one of these spots. We're going to talk about another one a little later, but it was a good point brought up by David. I don't have a whole lot to add about the race. I thought it was a really good effort from him. I do think he's going to excel at a mile, one turn mile, 7 furlong races. It wouldn't surprise me if he's a mile and a 16th horse, but since most of the bigger races in this country on dirt are run at a mile and an eighth, if you're talking a route, I'd really like to see him stick to the one turn and see just how good he is. There's not a whole lot to say about the others. I don't think any ran particularly notably good performances, but I was impressed with Vekoma.
Yeah, I mean, you're right to note that it wasn't a strong field, and I don't want to give Vekoma too much credit for beating them. But George Weaver, as we discussed last week, doesn't have great numbers off layoffs. I wouldn't be surprised if Vekoma probably needed this race a little bit. Even coming to the top of the stretch, you could see he was just showing some signs of rust, wasn't really in the bridle at the quarter pole, but he just got home on class and really finished up strongly, like the kind of horse, like the kind of finisher that you would expect from a horse that had won at grade 2 as a 3-year-old. So I'd be interested to see if he can take a step forward from this. He still has that really wacky action where his front legs are going in every direction, but doesn't seem to hinder him. Didn't hinder him last year and not so now. So I hope that they can keep this horse sound and on the racetrack, because he's one that could have an interesting year. Let's go back to the turf and discuss the Sand Springs for the fillies and mares. This one going the mile distance, the same as that Appleton we talked about earlier for the Colts and Geldings. This one, again, another one of these turf races where one trainer sent out the 2 top finishers, and La Signare, the other Brendan Walsh horse, got the job done over Zofel. This was yet another race where I think it was a tale of 2 different trips that might have made the difference.
Yeah, it probably was. I do want to note, though, this was the same race as Social Paranoia's win. It was run on a different setting. It was actually run on the same one as the Cutler Bay. I bring that up because I saw some questions about the speed figures, and people were comparing the times of the races and wondering how Social Paranoia could get such a higher figure. And I just want to say at Gulfstream, it really isn't wise to compare horses races run on different rail settings. And is a race where originally I had it a little bit higher, but when I compared it to that Cutler Bay, they're virtually identical on time. The run-ups were exactly the same. I timed them from video just to be sure. And the way it came back for me is it just wasn't a particularly strong race. She got a 108 for the win. Zofel regressed a little bit to get a 107. But if you watched her trip, I don't really think that's a surprise. You wouldn't expect that she had run her best number in here, given the trip that she had. And Valedictorian basically ran what she's been running. We talked about her on the forecast. We both thought she's not really the same horse she was last year. And I think we saw that in this spot where she had an easy lead and was run down by a couple horses that frankly didn't run all that great. They just ran better than the rest in here.
Yeah, I mean, Valedictorian probably did take a bit more pace pressure than it even looked like she would on paper, because 3 of the key speeds did scratch out of this race. And it is worth noting that newspaper of record, it was going to be the big favorite. She did not participate. So that just made this a weaker race overall. And perhaps that's an explanation for why it's not so surprising that it got a lower speed figure. And I agree, Valedictorian just doesn't seem like quite the same horse. She probably still should have gotten the job done if she were the valedictorian from last year that was running TimeformUS speed figures approaching 120 in almost every race. La Signare, she's okay. I don't think she is anything particularly special in graded stakes races at this division. But when she gets to go these shorter distances and when she gets the right kind of ride, she can be dangerous. She is a horse that tends to get a little bit rank in her races, especially when they send her longer distances. So I think this slightly faster pace going a shorter flat mile really did work to her advantage, because Tyler Gaffleone was able to get her to settle down early, and she produced that late kick. Also helped that she was able to get an outside run and really built up a lot of momentum coming to the quarter pole. Whereas Zofel, with Joel Rosario aboard, he was waiting inside for probably a touch too long. When you take chances like that and try to get through on the inside, sometimes you're just at the mercy of the horses ahead of you. And when they decide to vacate that rail position and the horse on the lead just shifted out a bit too late for Zofel to pick up enough momentum to get to her stablemate. But I thought both of these horses ran reasonably well.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it's interesting to note Tyler Gaffalione rode this horse and kind of not quite as dramatic, but it was almost the same move that he used on Zulu Alpha, where he chose to just make the wide sweeping move, even if he moved just a tad bit early than you would like. And it beat the horses who got bogged down inside. So, it's interesting, these trips. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And sometimes the jocks are just in no-win situations.
That wraps up the stakes racing at Gulfstream Park from last Saturday, but let's also discuss a couple of the allowance races that took place earlier in the day. One of those was a turf stakes, a turf allowance race in the third on the card that was won by the heavy favorite Largent for Todd Pletcher. This is a horse that seems like he's had a following since he debuted so impressively at Gulfstream Park last year as a 3-year-old. He's a 4-year-old now, was bet down to be the 4-5 favorite in this race, and didn't exactly win like you'd want a 4-5 shot to do so. He never looked like he had the victory sewn up. He actually had a horse outside of him and a little bit ahead of him all the way down the backstretch. Was able to come through inside the quarter pole, though, hold off the closers. But I thought some others also ran well in this race.
Yeah, I thought this was a really strong allowance race. It actually got a better speed figure than the Appleton did, a 119 for Largent. He's a lately raced 4-year-old. And what impressed me in here is he got a trip that I usually just don't like at all. When you're down inside, dueling for the lead, but don't have your head in front. A lot of horses don't take kindly to that. But he handled it well. And turning for home, stakes winner Temple, another Mike Maker horse we've talked about on the show before, made what looked like it was going to be a good winning run at him, and he just dug in gamely and held him off. So I was impressed by both the top two and even the top three. The shipper for Chad Brown, first time in North America. I won't pretend to know how to pronounce his name. I'll leave that to a smarter guy like David, but I thought he ran well in his debut here in North America. So pretty strong race, and this was definitely not your typical allowance contest for my eyes.
Yeah, I thought it was a strong race as well. I'm not quite as willing to give Largent extra credit as you are, because while he did have that uncomfortable inside position down the backstretch, I still thought this was a race that featured a pretty moderate pace, and it was one where I thought horses trying to make wide runs from the back of the pack were at a slight disadvantage. So if there's one horse that I would want to upgrade in this race, it would be that third place finisher that you mentioned. Let's go with Tribhuvan. This was his first start in this country for Chad Brown. He's a horse who had raced, I believe, in France last year and had even run in, I think, the Swedish Derby. So an unusual career so far for this horse, but seems like he's one that could have some potential for Chad Brown and perhaps going longer distances than this in the future. And he just was spun extremely wide coming off the far turn, and I thought really did well to get up for third given that ground loss. Temple, like you said, he's just rock solid, shows up every time. He's going to be tough in any kind of listed stakes race that they run, but a solid race. And Largent, to me, seems like a horse that has been very short prices in all of his races. He's run well up into this point, but I wonder if he's going to be a short price against Stakes Company next time, especially if it's a more competitive pace situation. If he's one that I'd be a little bit wary of maybe getting overbet.
Yeah, and I'd also mention just these Gulfstream turf courses certainly favor speed more than we're going to see. Well, more than we would normally see when these horses ship to Belmont and Keeneland and other places. Not sure how much of that we're going to get to see this year. So even if you think the pace was solid, we just have it average in a race like this. But even if you think it's solid, the horses still seem to have a little more finish up on the front end than they do at other places.
Another allowance race from Saturday, as we wrap up that card, was the fifth, a 1 mile optional claiming event. And this one generated a bit of an upset as the number 7 Winds of Change led the entire way. This is a race where the pace projector was predicting a fast pace, but if you looked through all the runners in the race, it was one of those situations where it was a fast pace, even though there weren't any confirmed front runners in the race. And I think Edgar Zayas just took advantage of that situation with Wind of Change, who was wearing blinkers for the first time. He was just pretty keyed up down the backstretch, and he took no prisoners. He just let him run off on the front end, and nobody could catch him in the lane.
Yeah, I actually thought this was a really strong race. It was a big upset in terms of odds, as the winner was 19-1. But he certainly looked on paper like he could win this race. It was just his second start since coming here from Brazil. He was a horse, and it was a strong effort. He got that 1:15 Timeform US, and he didn't do it easily. The two horses that challenged him early were actually pretty much horses people consider contenders in here. Intrepid Heart, I think, was one of them, and I forget the other two, but I know the two closest to him were horses that were actually bet. And then he got challenged late by the favorite, Network Effect, and he was able to fight them all off and hold on. So I thought it was a really game effort. Blinkers did the trick, and I really liked how they used his speed in here. They just, as Edgar Zayas, as you said, just took him right to the front, played catch me if you can, and nobody could.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want a red board, but I kind of agree with you that 19-1 was a little bit crazy on this horse when you consider that his first race in this country was actually really solid. I mean, he finished third in that stakes at Tampa behind Killybegg's Captain, who, let's be honest, he's turned into a really solid graded stakes level sprinter who I know they were pointing for the Golden Shahid in Dubai. I think obviously they'll be rerouting him to some stateside races at this point. He Hate Me was second in that race, so Wind of Change had only been beaten by some really good horses in his U.S. debut, and based on his races in Brazil, more distance was not supposed to be a problem. So I don't think it's a big shock that he improved a bit in this race, and I agree. He just ran them off their feet. Network Effect, Chewing Gum, they ran fine to be second and third, but they're two horses that don't have a ton of speed, and I think that just put them at a slight disadvantage here.
Yeah, and Al Mashriq was the other horse who I had forgotten that challenged him at the half-mile pole. He didn't get all that close, but he tried to make a move up. And just moving into the high pace cost him. He was actually only 7-2 in the race, and he wound up finishing a distant last.
We will wrap up this podcast with one more race from Gulfstream, although it was one that did not take place on that Saturday card. We'll move 2 days earlier to Thursday's program. The 9th race, it was a 6-furlong allowance race won by the Todd Pletcher trained Soldado. This was a horse that was making his second start off a layoff. He had won pretty impressively in his first start back in February. Had to work a lot harder for this victory at a short price. Don't think this was the kind of trip that Luis Saez drew up on paper.
No, I'm sure it wasn't. He's been a horse who has done most of his better running up on the lead. He was another one coming out of a race where we really penalized it. He had a final time of 113 on figure last time, but only a 100 overall. So this is another impetus to review how we do those races. But it was a pretty good run. He was a horse who showed some promise last year. He won first out. He then had trouble in a stake at Gulfstream. He shipped the Oaklawn, ran in an allowance race, but ran up against the really tough Warriors Charge and actually went all favored that day over Warriors Charge, if memory serves. If not, they were very close in the betting, maybe co-favorites, but just a good effort. And maybe this is one that just wants a sprint because he's shown he's versatile, and he's actually not lost going 6 furlongs. He's now 3 for 3. He got a 1:13 TimeformUS speed figure for this effort, which matched his final time effort from last time. So, promising lightly raced 4-year-old.
Yeah, I had written you that email earlier in the week about Vekoma, but really more so with this race in mind, because we gave Soldado a 1:13 final time figure for his return race back in February, and that figure got knocked down 13 points to the 100 TimeformUS speed figure. And I know this is something that you want to look at as well, because both Soldado and Traveling Midas, the first two finishers in that February race, both came back to run really well this weekend at Gulfstream, really running back and basically repeating their final time figures from the prior race. And I think this is something that we've been starting to see a lot, where there's just not a whole lot of aggression in a lot of these dirt sprints, and horses sometimes are able to finish pretty quickly, especially in these upper level races. We've seen it a number of times at Gulfstream over this winter. I'm even thinking about that return race for Hidden Scroll, where he didn't run that fast in the early going, but really finished up well through the lane. I know that's a figure we knocked down quite a bit. The same thing with that Frank's Roquette race when she won I want to say like the Old Hat going 6 furlongs, a really fast final time. But again, a situation where we knocked down the speed figure a lot because she finished so fast. And the thing about it is with a horse like Soldado, maybe this wouldn't be the case so much with Hidden Scroll, but I think with a lot of these horses that are able to finish up fast after setting the pace in these races, they're able to adapt their running styles and come from off the pace like Soldado did in his next start. So I think you don't want to be too negative on these horses, because it's not saying that they need the lead to win, and when they have to run faster to get the lead, they're going to be unsuccessful, because sometimes these horses can change up their running styles and run a similar speed figure, just doing it coming from off the pace.
Yeah, and it's a good point you make, I think, about the riders. They're just not as aggressive as they used to be. There was a time when we actually came up with the algorithms we did and we tested them that this was the way to go. But this just points out the game does change and you have to review things. And that's what we're in the process of doing now, because I don't think many people would doubt, especially on the bigger circuits, that the running styles of riders have changed for whatever reason, and they're not as aggressive. You don't see as many hot paces. So a lot of times when these horses fall into leads and slow fractions, it's almost by default, really, then that they're true front runners. And we saw that with Soldado. He was nowhere near the lead this time. He was able to adapt his running style and still get the same kind of final time figure.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And one of the positives about having a schedule that's a little less busy these days is you get to look at stuff like that and really take a second glance, because sometimes during the racing calendar every year, it seems like there's no real lull and no real break to work on stuff like this. So maybe we'll have some time to think about more things like this and do some work and make some improvements in the coming weeks and months. Craig, so that's all for this week's podcast. We'll see what happens this Friday when we would normally do the TimeformUS forecast. As you said, Santa Anita is not quite certain to run at this point. I think they're still not scheduled at the moment. So we'll see if that changes between now and Friday. Obviously, if there is stakes racing to discuss, we'll discuss it on the TimeformUS forecast. We'll see if we want to use that time for something else if there's not racing, but we'll obviously post that on social media this week if there are any developments on that front. I know, though, both of us still will be posting on social media, regardless if there's racing or not, just to engage with the fans during this time to keep everybody busy and thinking about some other stuff.
Yeah, there's always stuff to talk about. I just did a thing where I posted who I thought were the best horses to ever win a Breeders' Cup race from everyone. Something I would never do ever, but just bored out of my mind at times here. Can only play so much Gallop Racer. The fingers start to get tired. So I'm sure we'll find plenty of things to talk about. I know our friend Andy Serling's been posting a lot of polls. He puts up some replays, some really fun stuff. So there is still stuff to keep you occupied and keep your mind on racing when, frankly, there's not a lot of other fun stuff to think about. Kind of a nice diversion from the real world at times.
Yeah, as I mentioned to you before we started, I'm quarantining at my dad's place right now. I'm not sick. I'm just staying away because I came out of the city. I don't want to get anybody sick that's around me, just in case. But he's got a ton of racing memorabilia at his house, so I've been going through some of that recently. And if I find some interesting things, I'll post them on Twitter over the next couple of days, because it's interesting for me just to look back at some of racing history, and it helps you learn a little bit, because there are some great horses and great races from the past that I'm just not familiar with, and it's fun to go back and look into the history of all those. So I'll be posting those for the rest of this week and moving forward, as long as there's not a ton of racing on the calendar. Craig, fun to talk about this last Saturday card at Gulfstream with you this week. As always, you can listen to the TimeformUS Pacecast and the TimeformUS Forecast on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll be back again later in the week. Let's hope.